After my Hulk video, I promised myself, no more four-way verses. It's just too much. Anyway, here's Rhino. Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation, where I review action figures and then articulate 5 points to help you decide if you want to add that figure to your collection. The 5 points I discuss are packaging, presentation, posability, playability, and price. I'm Jason, and if you enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube rigmarole. In this corner, the 2006 Fearsome Foes box set Rhino by Toy Biz. And in this corner, the 2012 Rhino by Marvel Select. And in this corner, the Hasbro Marvel Legends 2015 Rhino Build-A-Figure. And in this corner, the all-new Marvel Legends Retro Card Reissue. Today, we're going to figure out which one is the best Rhino action figure ever made. Unfortunately, I don't have any packaging for these three. Fearsome Foes came in a nice big window box showing you all the figures you're getting. On the back, not only did it have bios for all the characters, but it even included stats kind of like Dungeons & Dragons. Marvel Select, of course, came in a nice big blister card. The Build-A-Figure, of course, didn't have a package on account of the fact that it was a Build-A-Figure. The new one, of course, comes on a retro-style blister card designed to emulate the packaging from the original Toy Biz figures. Animated Spiderman logo up here. Picture of Rhino on a billboard. We can see that picture again on the back. We also get a very small bio, instructions how to switch his parts out, and other available retro figures. I'm still trying to find this guy, and on the subject of finding stuff, if any of you want the barcode, well, here you go. Unlike the Marvel Legends retro cards, I am very nostalgic for these. But does that make it the best package? In my Hulk versus, I chose the 80 years version because of its nice reusable window box. And to be honest, the Fearsome Foes one is really, really nice. That being said, I can't deny my love for this. For packaging, this round goes to Retro Card. Moving on to presentation, and at the top of his horns, Fearsome Foes comes to 7.5 inches, Marvel Select comes to 9, and the Hasbros come to 8.25. First things first, and I want to give a huge shout out to my friend David for lending me your Rhino Build-A-Figure. Without you, this video would not be possible. Going into it, it's important to note that these two have mostly the same body. The only difference are the heads and shoulders. Moving from horn to hoof, and these three have very similar heads. They all look like they're wearing an actual rhino's head like a mask, and the rhino's mouth has a small window where his real grimacing face is peering out. The Fearsome Foes one has a real case of chiclet teeth, but the new retro card version is painted particularly well. Switching over to the Build-A-Figure version, and he looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger just broke his helmet on Mars. The Build-A-Figure Rhino was cast in a dark gray plastic with some brownish dry brushing, kinda gives him a muddy look. The Fearsome Foes version has a more cracked texture with some airbrush shading. Marvel Select was cast in a darker gray with some light gray dry brushing, really brings out all that detail and creates a nice sense of depth. The Retro Card version was cast in a light gray with some dark shadows sprayed over the muscles. Out of all of them, this technique is my least favorite. Adding those darker patches does nothing to create any kind of sense of depth. If anything, I think it does the opposite. If they weren't going to do it like this, I would have preferred that they left the whole thing plain. One thing I will say for the Build-A-Figure, I might not like the color scheme, but they didn't cheap out on the paint. Since we are moving down the body, it's probably a good time to talk about proportions. Rightly so, the Fearsome Foes version is fairly barrel-chested, but his arms and legs seem kinda spindly by comparison. In that regard, the Marvel Select and Hasbro bodies cut a much better silhouette. I also much prefer the Marvel Select's hip joints. Since they're older figures, Toy Biz and Hasbro have very obvious balls for the hips. Granted, Hasbro hides it better, but Marvel Select doesn't have to hide it at all. Not only that, but he gets perfect thigh rotation. And finally, making it all the way to the bottom, here we have the feet. Hasbro and Select very clearly have hooves, with comics-accurate 3 toes on each. Toy Biz, on the other hand, opted to give him more human-like feet, with an inaccurate 4 toes on each. Presentation is what an action figure looks like. Things like engineering are important, but that's more of a conversation for the next category. All 4 of these figures have their strengths, but just in terms of stature and sculpted and painted detail, for me, this round goes to Marvel Select. Moving on to posability, and that's where we find the biggest differences between the 4. From the top, and Fearsome Foes has a ball joint and a disc hinge. He can look up this much and down this much. Little bit of tilt and all the way around. Marvel Select's has a ball joint at the base of the neck. No real up and down to speak of. Pretty good tilt though, and of course side to side. Both the Build-A-Figure and Retro Card are on a swivel hinge. Up this much, this far down. No tilt whatsoever, and not even all the way around. All 4 figures have swivel hinge shoulders. Fearsome Foes can raise his arm up all the way, about 45 degrees for Marvel Select, even less for the Build-A-Figure. This is partly due to the shoulder pad. As you can see, the retro card, which doesn't have a shoulder pad, gets a bit more. If you want to give the Build-A-Figure a more classic look, you can remove the shoulder pads. Just be warned that there will be a hole left behind. No bicep swivel for Marvel Select, but the other 3 have it. They also all have single jointed elbows. Select also has a single jointed elbow, but his can swivel. Moving all the way down the arm, and Fearsome Foes and Select can only swivel at the wrist. The Build-A-Figure and retro card, however, can swivel and hinge. One thing that separates the Fearsome Foes, however, is that he has individually articulated fingers on each one of his hands. This allows him to make a fist. He can also make other gestures that are simply too impolite for this channel. Shifting to the torso, and both Fearsome Foes and Marvel Select have a diaphragm joint. They can arch back this far and hunch over this far. Select also has a great amount of tilt and twist. The Build-A-Figure and retro card have an ab crunch and a swivel waist. They can't arch back at all, but they can hunch over this far. Also, the Build-A-Figure version jiggles. The retro card version folds. In addition to the diaphragm joint, the Fearsome Foes also has a waist cut below the waist, and he has swivel hinge hips. They kick out this far and do a perfect split. Marvel Select also has swivel hinge hips. They don't really kick forward at all, but they can split a decent amount. They can also twist. The Build-A-Figure and retro card have ball jointed hips. They can kick out this far and split this far. Because of the balls in the hips, they have very similar thigh articulation, but whereas the Build-A-Figure and retro card have single jointed knees, Marvel Select has single jointed swivels, and Fearsome Foes actually has double jointed knees. Both Hasbro and Select have ankles that hinge and pivot. Fearsome Foes also hinge, and while they don't fully pivot, they do have a bit of side to side and toe-ticulation. In Marvel Select's defense, they are contractually limited in the number of points of articulation that they can have. I assume that it's to keep them from competing with Marvel Legends. And to be honest, the Marvel Legends articulation is pretty impressive. Out of all of them, Marvel Legends is the only one that you can pose standing on one foot. And thanks to updated shoulders and a tighter ab crunch, the retro card version is even better. That said, there is no arguing which one of these has the superior range. And that's to say nothing about the toe-ticulation, double-jointed knees, and individually articulated fingers. For posability, this round goes to Toy Biz. Moving on to playability, and Fearsome Foes came with a figure stand that I can unfortunately not find right now. The box set also included Carnage, Spiderman, Lizard, and Vulture. Marvel Select came with no accessories whatsoever. The Build-A-Figure, however, comes with this alternate head. To be honest, I never really cared much for this look. I would have preferred 2 different expressions of the same face instead of 2 entirely different ones. And wouldn't you know it, but that's exactly what Hasbro did this time around. The mouth on the alternate head is closed, but does have a little sneer, and Hasbro's done a great job of painting the eyes and lips. Retro Rhino comes preloaded with the same fist that we saw in the Build-A-Figure, but he also comes with these brand new open hands, which allow him to perfectly pick up other figures. But playability is more than just accessories, it's also about how well your figures play with others. For just a quick rundown of the Rhinos that brought us here, here's the original Toy Biz version. It was first released in 1994. This one, however, is a 1996 reissue. It came with a special switch in the back that let his head do this. Whoop! Whoo! The next time we'd see Rhino would be in 1997 with the Spiderman Web Trap series. Definitely a more dynamic sculpt than we got before. In 2001 we got this figure as part of the Spider-Man Classic series. This was the very first 6-inch scale Rhino figure ever made. The next time that Rhino would charge into toy store shelves would be 2004 with this Ultimate version. Also, if you pull his arm back, he does this. This of course brings us back to 2006 and our discussion today. Even so, as we look at the original side by side with the newest release, it's hard not to appreciate just how far both Rhino and action figures have come. As the late great Glenn Webb would say, action figure evolution. First things first, and we've got to look at a few different versions of Spider-Man. Both of these are from Toy Biz. The one on his right came with an alternate Peter Parker head, and the one on his left came in the Fearsome Foes box set. Here we have a couple of Hasbro versions. I'm sure you recognize these as Pizza Spidey and the retro card. Definitely 2 of the best Spider-Man figures ever made. One of these days I should probably do a Spider-Man versus. Just for the sake of scale, here we have a couple of Marvel Selects. Obviously they scale pretty well with the Marvel Select version. To be honest, I think you could make it work with Marvel Legends. Legends. Either way, I would have to include the Spectacular Spider-Man in my Spider-Man verses. And speaking of Spider-Verses, here we have a couple of different versions of Miles Morales. See what I did there? The one in the jacket is from Into the Spider-Verse, and the other one is from the PlayStation video game. Hopefully we see Rhino in one of the upcoming movies, and on the subject of upcoming things, I have a brand new Miles Morales video coming out, so definitely keep your eyes peeled for that. Shifting over to some villains, and here we have Carnage. The one on his right is from the Fearsome Foes box set, and the one on his left is from the Marvel Legends Venom Pool wave. Personally, Rhino with a symbiote would be something I would very much like to see. Here we have a couple of different versions of the Lizard. The small one is from Fearsome Foes, and the big one is Marvel Select. Unfortunately, I was never able to complete the Marvel Legends Build-A-Figure. The good news is that there is that retro card version coming out. The bad news is that it's a Walmart exclusive. Rounding out the Fearsome Foes box set villains is the Vulture. Truth be told, I much prefer the more feathery wings of the Toy Biz version. In fact, I had to crazy glue the Hasbro ones just to keep them in place. Hopefully at some point we get a retro card version of him based on the animated series design. For some other Spider-Man villains, here we have the Green Goblin. The darker one is from Series 10 of the Toy Biz version of Marvel Legends. The brighter one is the Hasbro Marvel Legends retro card version. Currently, the Toy Biz version is the one that I use in my display. Here we have Toy Biz and Hasbro versions of Sandman. I never did get the Marvel Select version of that one. I also never got that Build-A-Figure. I do, however, have a review of the retro card version, which if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check out. Here we have a couple of different versions of Electro. The bigger one is from Marvel Select, and I think is a pretty underrated figure. The smaller one with the lightning hands is the Marvel Legends retro card version. Although the Spectacular Spider-Man looked pretty good with this Rhino, I think that this Electro might be a bit too tall. For a larger scale Spider-Man villain comparison, here we have the Kingpin. Considering how much they like the bigger characters, I'm surprised that we never got a Marvel Select version of him. There was, of course, a Marvel Legends Build-A-Figure version, which I've never completed, and honestly, I'm pretty happy with this retro card version. Lastly, here we have a couple of different versions of Venom. The big one is from Marvel Select, and the smaller one is by Toy Biz. Marvel Select is the one that I use in my display, at least until the null 2-pack comes out. And for one more heavy hitter, here we have the Hulk. This, of course, is the Marvel Legends 80 Years version. If you haven't already, you should definitely check out my Hulk versus. Not only is it a 4-way battle like this, but it's also my 150th video. But of course, here's everybody with Stealth Iron Man. Since he is such a larger-than-life character, any one of these Rhinos would scale great with your 6-inch Spider-Man collection. So really, it all comes down to accessories. With two really good head options and alternate hands that allow you to grapple other figures, for playability, this round goes to Retro Card. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. Retro Card Rhino retails for about $40, which seems like a lot until you consider the competition. All three of these average between $70 to $90 on eBay, and that's loose. New in box, these two go anywhere between $180 to $300 plus. If you don't care about such things, you can sometimes find a bootleg version of Marvel Select on eBay for about $50, but for price, the obvious choice is Retro Card, who wins the battle 3 to 1 to 1. All that being said, for preference, Marvel Select is my personal favorite and the one that will probably continue to rampage through my display. For more verses, check out this video on the Incredible Hulk or this one on Ben Reilly's Spider-Man. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.